Good evening and welcome to Know Before You Grow, a subcommittee of Petaluma Urban Chat. I'm Dan Like, and as always, many thanks to Dave Alden and Sharon Kirk for doing the heavy lifting. And also, especially tonight, thanks to Lizzie Wallach for putting together the program for this evening. I think the hosting duties have been dropped off onto me, but I'm most grateful that she has put this together. Short announcements. We have been Zoom bombed. We will be Zoom bombed again. If things get weird, stay on the line. If I boot you off accidentally, join back in. If you know anybody who's having trouble getting in, especially after something like that, please tell them to check the chat, because if I start vetting people in the chat room and I don't get a response, I won't let you in. I think at this point, the warnings about Brown Act are overplayed. So if people don't speak up, go read up on the Brown Act. They can make their own decisions. A couple of upcoming events. Tomorrow at Aquas Cafe at noon. We would love to have more people come, because we need, if we're going to get Chuck Marone to come in June and chat, we need some more people to do a little bit more networking and work on that. And we are always looking for more people to join the cabal. Upcoming events, the only one we have scheduled other than that is May 11th with Smart General Manager Eddie Cummins. Smart's been doing an awful lot of outreach recently, and we hope you will join us for that. And with that, on to our evening's presentations. We're going to start with Jane Lynn. Jane Lynn is an urban designer, architect, and founding partner at Urban Field Studio. Jane has been working with the cities of Albany, Emeryville, San Leandro, Berkeley, and Union City on objective design standards, design guidelines, and zoning amendments to streamline housing production. Jane teaches at UC Berkeley and also teaches school-aged kids architecture, exercising her ability to speak directly about the world around us. Jane, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you everyone for having me tonight. And I'm excited to talk about missing middle housing. I wanted to sort of just start us off today with some of the definitions and what we mean about missing middle housing. My specialty is really working on the growth of cities from something that is more suburban in scale to a little bit more urban, but not very, very urban. So there's quite a lot of different kinds of stages that each city goes through. And so I would say your community is not alone. Pretty much every community surrounding the Bay Area is making this transition from lower density to higher density. And so how to do it is really an important thing to consider. So I'm going to do a little presentation. A lot of it is very much graphic. And so I will start sharing. Give me just a moment while I set this up. And I will hit the slideshow button. Oh, there's too much Zoom stuff in the way. Here we go. So we're going to talk about sort of what housing has meant to a lot of people. To just begin with, the American dream is a single family home, and hopefully in a very bucolic setting. And when people think about more housing, they go kind of to the other extreme, and they think about crowding and disease and pollution and basically scenes from the tenements, which is both of these are actually quite extreme. So, you know, the perfect idyllic dream, some of us are lucky enough to have that, but there's problems with it too. And the more high density multifamily housing doesn't always have to be like this. And of course, over time, we've really gone a long way to think of a lot of other options in the middle. And so we need to bring up the missing middle. And this is a great graphic done by Opticos Design. There's a fantastic book about missing middle. If you've never known about this term, it's a great place to start. The book really goes into detail about all of the different types of missing middle housing, much more than I will tonight. So I'm saying this is a signed reading if you really want to know more. The majority of our urban landscape is in our areas, detached single family homes. And then there are a couple places you can imagine in the city of San Francisco, for example, that are larger apartments, but there are a lot of different grades in between. So, and some of these can look very livable in terms of the way they look, yet they're more dense. And so we'll talk about those a lot. This is a study of what is single family zoning in pink and other kinds of zoning, other kinds of residential zoning in blue. And for the city of Albany, I felt like it was really interesting to see this. You can quickly see how much of our area, especially in the Bay Area, that's the map on the right, how much of it is zoned for single family housing. And there is quite a lot. And it's really important to acknowledge this. This is the majority of our land and is quite low density. But what can be done? And I think this is because it was developed at a time when this was absolutely the typology that was the most common. And as we start to think about our region and its growth, we've kind of run out of space. We want to keep the parts that are green, green. And so we're going to have to densify some of these pink spaces, and how we do that, that's a big question. When we talk about affordable housing, this is a really long and complicated conversation, but we're really talking about perhaps expanding our understanding of who needs housing from the nuclear family, the 2 parents, 2 kids kind of model, and thinking about the different stages of our lives, and perhaps stages we might experience, but maybe they're not as well, but they're stages that other people may experience. And you think about your full cycle. So you might grow up with your parents, but your parents might be, you might just have one of them living with you. It could be that you have a different situation where you live in different places. And as a young adult, what you need for affordable housing, you may not have. You're just getting started in life, and what you can afford is something that you hope is in a place that you want to be. And also thinking about the folks in our community that are not at the top of the income bracket, how we can really accommodate them and bring them. These are people who are helping us, serving us, and being a big part of our community. They're, here it says teachers, but it could mean many other things. It can mean everyone you ever meet in your day. But you know, they may not necessarily be the ones who own the single family homes, and there's just such a big range of incomes. And of course, if you are retired and you stop having your normal income, and there maybe you want to downsize, and so this is another group to imagine in your later stages in life that might want or need affordable housing in a different format than the single family home. And so when we think about some of our options, you can imagine on a single family lot that there are a lot of different ways to do this. You can do side by side in a duplex. You can stack that side by side in a fourplex. You can think about the courtyard building, townhouses, triplexes. There's a lot of different ways. It's like a little puzzle. We just really like to think about how, as an architect, I'm always kind of thinking about how these blocks fit together and how to make them efficient and still look like a house, like a regular house, like a residential scale regular house with a pitch roof, and make it really fit into our existing neighborhoods, but grown up a little bit bigger, but not hugely bigger. There's also thinking about how we can rethink how the house is designed, and perhaps some of these houses are beyond what we think about for units, and they could mean communal living. And this is another great way to house more people too. So taking a normal regular house, and you can redivide it into rented rooms, or it could be co-living and co-housing. These are some sort of maybe newer ideas for some. The cities definitely are having to think about how to accommodate co-living, co-housing in the way that they're planning for them. It's a little less traditional than a single family home, so it's somewhat of a new concept. And also the idea of how people could end up roommates, and in the picture on the bottom right, this is where someone might own the home, they get a little older, they're their family may move away, but then they rent out a room, and there, in exchange, you get more camaraderie, and there's something really wonderful about having a mix of generations in this kind of situation. So it's just sort of breaking out of our mold of what we think is typical affordable housing and our units. So anyway, here are some images of what a duplex could look like, a fourplex courtyard and cottage houses. And these are probably not noticeable in most communities. They either look kind of like a large mansion, or, you know, you might notice them a little bit, but they definitely fit in. And some of them have a lot of the features and design. They're designed quite like their neighbors. So there's ways to really fit in. And here's just a couple more, and you can imagine, like, if buildings have no setbacks, or on the sides and no setbacks on the front, how that might really affect how things feel on the street. And sometimes thinking about that space and what you need, we need to use real examples to kind of see, was that really as horrible or as crowded as we thought? Or is this like something we see when we go traveling in European countries or anywhere? Really, there's a lot of examples like this everywhere. So it's important to take note, because we're quite used to the suburban model now, and it's really important to see that this model is really ubiquitous, but maybe sometimes it looks older and older, from older times, or from other places. Now, one of the ways that we can gently introduce more density is to add to our single family lots. So this is already part of state law. You are already allowed to do an ADU and a junior ADU. So these are, I'm sure you may have heard about ADUs. They're accessory dwelling units, and they can take many different forms. They can either be part of your home, or they could be a separate structure from your home, like your converted garage in the back, or it can be something completely new, so like a new structure in the back, or you can think of it as an extension or a remodel. And all of these are just, most of them are away from the street, so you kind of can't tell that something has changed on the site. And often it really creates sort of this coziness in the backyard as well. So it's another way for people to supplement the income on their house, maybe help out with a mortgage with a renter and that kind of thing. It really does increase the value of your property by having another unit on the property that you rent out. So there's many ways to do it. This is just another graphic that kind of shows how you can possibly do it by either dividing the house in different ways, or remodeling it, or really rethinking how to divide up an existing single family home. And then, of course, there are a lot of different ways that it can express itself. And this, from these images, it's really important to kind of note sort of different ways that missing middle housing can express itself. And some of them are very different styles. Some of them are taller than others. Some have different proportions than others. And they really are just, there's just great variety. So when you're thinking about missing middle, it isn't a particular style. It is a whole multitude of different things. And this is part of the variety of it. And if you can imagine how we can rethink our block and really just densify, you can still have great open space. In fact, sometimes smaller open spaces that are more intensely designed or have more elements in them can be really, really enjoyable. They can be these, you can grow food, you can have your decorative plants, you can enjoy your outside space. And it's kind of amazing how much impact you can have with smaller open spaces as well. So that's one other thing too. Some people get concerned, but there's different ways to use that open space as designed. So I work in a pretty wonky part of the whole missing middle. I do a lot of thinking about how to adjust our zoning to make this work. And we do a lot of studies for the different cities in the East Bay primarily, but hey, that kind of landscape is not dissimilar to Petaluma. So this is just to show you that there's some really great toolkits out there. That this one's from the Association of Monterey Bay Governments, and we're not the only area, the metro area, that looks at this. Obviously, there's all up and down the state of California. There are other counties and other places that are really looking at this. So there's a lot of great examples out there. And in these, it's the explanation of what they are and what is considered, just nomenclature for multi-dwelling development is really helpful to see. And so this one is from Portland, and Portland was one of the first to really embrace the missing middle. So they're a great example if you want to learn more about how Portland has filled in some of their neighborhoods with really livable density. And there's a lot of issues. And so this is another thing to consider. I know that as we talk about ADUs, people are highly concerned about privacy, about access to sunlight and open space. And so these are just some of the strategies. There's a lot of design solutions for making it livable. And, there's ways to design so that you can minimize the visibility of your neighbors, or minimize privacy impacts. And also, I'll show you an example in a moment about how we're really carefully looking at the impact of a taller building nearby to a smaller one, as we're kind of imagining how how single family lots are densifying. And so landscaping and the design of the building, these are all different ways of considering how to make things more private, especially if you start to live closer to each other. This is sometimes one of the first things that people who are concerned about more density think about, but there are a lot of great design solutions that make it possible for people to live more closely together. Also, in thinking about, when you're densifying, what the private outdoor space is like, and it's really trying to design something very usable with courtyards and things like that that really make the most of those spaces. So one of the things we do is really look at what you can build. And so this is just an example from what we did in San Leandro. We did a zoning study. We looked at our zoning laws and just we're checking out whether or not multifamily housing was allowed. And so we were looking at some of the laws, and this one in particular, I know Petaluma doesn't have this, but there's a bunch of laws on the books that make it really difficult for even housing to happen on regular, or this one's somewhat irregular lot. And one of them is the daylight plane. And this is making an angled condition where it really cuts down on where you can develop on the lot. And so in this top left, we're showing sort of the zoning envelope. I like to say it's the glass box that you can build within. And what is allowed right now can only yield so many townhomes. But if you didn't have that, you could still have somewhat livable density and more density if it were just made a little more regular. So this was one of the things we did while looking at San Leandro. And the other is just to see, when you have a site, how much could you possibly put on there, and whether or not the zoning laws allow for more than townhomes. And this is for a larger scale than what you're really talking about today, but just thinking about how to accommodate more units as we're thinking about our housing crisis. And when we do that, we're really kind of re-examining our laws around density and also about the different development standards that we have. Now, to make it easier, this has been some of the other interesting work that I've seen. This is not work that we did, but I am on the Housing Advisory Committee in the city of Piedmont, and we are looking at how to densify the city of Piedmont, which it's like 95% single family homes. And so how to do that, City of Piedmont, and I think this is also the case and with the City of Petaluma, has some pre-approved ADU plans. So these are, if you do it just like this, you are already approved. You can get a permit and you can just build it just like this. Here's a couple different examples of what they could look like. They have different expressions for the different styles of the homes. Oops, sorry. Oh, dear goodness. We're going in the wrong way. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. So, so it just goes to show that there's a bunch of different ways that you can design the ADUs, and it's very interesting just to see how these are presented, because they are partially inspiration of what is allowable, but also gives people sort of a design to work from. It's sort of a good way to get started. So if you deviate from this, you do have to go through the standard process, but if you do, these are some pretty well thought out designs. So that's part of the program there to make it easier and more streamlined to get an ADU. Okay, so I'm gonna this is my last project that I'm gonna talk to you about. I work for the City of Berkeley on their zoning, and they were really looking at single family homes and thinking about, now that you have the state laws for ADU and junior ADU, that they should try to make 2 to 4 units allowable by right, but with certain conditions. And so this idea of by right is, also streamlining the ability to do housing. So I'm getting more advanced here. I know we started off with just thinking about affordable housing in general, but I think that some of these, as you get more into it, you may start to see that these are some of the things we're starting to talk about. I know that perhaps there's a lot of other people in the City of Petaluma that might also have like a 40-foot wide lot, and thinking about the setbacks and how close buildings are to each other. And so we studied what the existing laws can do, and then we started to think about which ones are that make a lot of sense. Berkeley has a lot of maybe too many laws, and so they're trying to streamline how to approve things. So we were thinking about the by right laws, and so we were trying to think about the prototypes. We made a bunch of prototypes of what these different buildings could be on those lots. Some of them include an existing building with a new building. Some of them are an extension of an old building. Some of them are 2 brand new buildings, or there could be others more than this. So I think thinking about how they are situated, and you can kind of see them within, we put them in a hypothetical block, so you could kind of see how some of these buildings are situated with their neighbors. But we're also looking at it from a very odd angle, like as if we were a bird and as if the world didn't have any trees. So this is really important, because when you think about densifying, people sometimes just think about the number. They're like, oh my gosh, you're going to build to like 3 stories, which sounds really high. And that was something we needed to illustrate a little bit, to say, there are some impacts, but what are they really? And so in Berkeley, there was definitely a concern about the solar conditions, because a lot of people have solar power on their rooftops. And if your neighbor builds a taller building, what would happen? And I think this is perhaps maybe an issue in other communities as well. So we studied it in great detail, and we looked at the solar path, and we thought of a hypothetical situation where you had a maxed out building, and you had neighbors on both sides with solar panels. And this is not always the case. And we didn't include any trees, because trees would also affect this. But we want to just kind of see like what the issue is. And we did a really quick little model just to look at how this works. And so I'm just gonna, sorry, I'm gonna just oops. I'm going to try to screen share my video here for a second. And it kind of shows, and I'm sorry, this isn't full screen, but it kind of shows sort of the shadow as it moves across over the day. And we were just looking at the equinox, and it's just kind of useful to know like exactly how far it goes into the next block. And we wanted to look at it in two conditions, for a 2-story building and then a 3-story building. And then we really wanted to study it quantitatively, just to sort of get a sense of like how much shadow is impacting when you build right to the edges. And we call this the worst case scenario because it could never be, these are kind of tough conditions to really do it in. So I'm back to the slideshow. And also to say, you know, as we kept going, we actually made the volume of the building a little bigger just to see exactly what it was. And we traced all the shadows and measured them on the roof and just kind of got a sense of what was happening. And what we found was there was about a 15% difference for the solar panels on the roofs of the neighboring buildings. And when we were thinking of the trade-off of the 15% difference on the energy impact of the solar panels versus someone having a new unit, or not a new unit, but a place to live, it was hard to, you know, they're not really apples to apples, but this is the trade-offs we're thinking about. And it's good to kind of know, at least we know sort of the quantitative impact, and then we can kind of, you know, at least know that data. And so we were kind of comparing these two for a 28-foot and a 35-foot tall building. These are not crazy big. And the difference is 1 story. And so just to say that the impact is pretty minor for that. And so I did go through a bunch of wonky stuff, but what I hope you take away from just this quick introduction of missing middle housing is that there are a lot of types of missing middle housing. And I hope you can imagine how some of them can fit into your neighborhood and really help us on our way to getting more housing to meet our needs in this housing crisis. And so I'm assuming we'll have questions at the end, and I throw this back to you, Dan.
Awesome. Thank you, Jane. And before we go on to questions, and I'm going to ask you to stop sharing because that'll save me fumbling around and finding the buttons. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Annie Fryman. Annie Fryman is the Director of Cities at Abodu, a Bay Area-based company that builds affordable and high-quality accessory dwelling units in California and Washington. In this role, Annie manages long-term strategy and operations for Abodu's city relationships and permitting program, advises the executive team on public policy, provides expert technical assistance to local and state agencies on successful state law implementation, and manages Abodu's response to complex building permit issues. Annie, you want to take it away? Oh, before you do, sorry about this. If everybody else hasn't caught on yet, I forgot to mention this in the intro. Please toss questions in the chat. Please, let's kind of keep this focused on building focused questions and not going off in other directions, because I'm trying to monitor that. And yeah, okay, back over to Annie.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm going to set up my screen share real quick, if you'll give me 1 second. Changes. Let's make sure that this works. Okay, desktop.
Woohoo!
Okay, terrific. Can you see this all right?
I do.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Let me go to slideshow mode. All right, everyone. So thank you so much for the friendly introduction and for joining us tonight. As Dan mentioned, my name is Annie Fryman. I'm the Director of Cities at Abodu. And also relevant to the conversation tonight, I was actually trained as an architect and practiced as a designer in San Francisco in the era that was pre-state ADU reforms, working at a law firm or at an architecture firm that was trying to get ADUs permitted. And so it's an interesting perspective, I think, to have in the pre-state reforms specifically for ADUs, all the hoops that we had to jump through to build those at far lower numbers than we're seeing now, and also much slower than we're seeing now, particularly on the permitting front. And then in this new world that we're in the state reforms, particularly in California. So my presentation tonight is going to be focused specifically on ADUs, though I can answer questions about other things. And also of relevance, between working in architecture and working at Abodu, handling our permitting and policy program, I worked in the state capitol on housing legislation. And so kind of going from that designer practitioner side of, we're on the receiving end of everything that's broken in the system of building missing middle and infill housing, to really getting in the middle of that machine, for lack of a better term, of how do we change these rules to make them work better based on what we've seen is broken. And then going back to this implementation side, right? Of, okay, now that we're in this new world, how do we make sure that cities are well trained on how to handle these laws, that homeowners know their sort of rights under these new laws, that builders can take advantage of them easily under the integrity of the law, et cetera. So moving on, I'm going to talk specifically today about the company that I work for named Abodu. And I think that a lot of the lessons that I will be sharing today are transferable across a lot of different ADU builders, but I think it would be helpful to have that one concrete perspective from one concrete builder and the experience that we've had. Abodu's mission is to delight homeowners with a beautiful backyard home, detached ADUs, and also demonstrate how easy a construction project really can be. That's a big focus on our team on the operational front, especially. How do we make sure that homeowners themselves are insulated from a lot of the headaches that often can come up during the process? And also that we as a company can have that really centralized focus on how do we make this as efficient as possible, as fast as possible, as reliable as possible. And also, how can we take lessons that we learn in one project and move forward our understanding on other projects to kind of constantly iterate over the many hundreds of projects that we can move forward. Abodu is not a custom designer. We don't do site build, general contracting work. We don't do garage conversions or JADUs. We're very, very focused on detached ADUs that operate through California's factory built housing program. There are some design customizations that we offer that I'll talk about briefly, but for the most part, our designs are pretty standard, which helps in this permitting front, as well as helps us navigate ADU law. So just again, going back to here, we manage the entire process from permitting all the way to installation and post-installation, certificate of occupancy and some of the warranty components as well, to really just make sure that homeowners have that one-stop shop, that one trusted team, and they're not juggling this huge patchwork of the contractors, the permitting person, the architect, the engineer, the other permitting person, what's going on with the city planner, what's going on with this supply chain issue, all of that. So trying to simplify that into one party from the homeowner's point of view. Again, just kind of going in, I think I just got ahead of myself here. I think the big takeaway on here is that, Abodu is pretty integrated, and we're able to do that by having a standardized design, a factory built housing program, and that enables us to build ADUs fast and at a very, very predictable price for homeowners. These are the 3 units that we offer: a studio unit, 340 square feet, a 1-bedroom at 500 square feet, and a 2-bedroom at 610 square feet. The reason that I bring this up here is not necessarily to give a marketing or sales pitch, but actually to really point out that you can have extraordinary design in a really, really small space. And I think that that's central to the conversation that we're having today about missing middle housing and about this transformation of different types of neighborhoods. And I think Jane did a great job in her discussion about really showing the diversity of all the different typologies that we can have and promote for all of these different use cases. Additionally, from a policy perspective, one thing that is interesting about having these specific sizes of the 3 units is that in California specifically, as long as your units are under 750 square feet for some standards and 800 square feet for other standards, you get a ton of different waivers, both for fees and also planning standards. And so by upfront designing our standardized units with that in mind, we can cut $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 worth of impact fees off the top of a project just by the fact that we are 610 square feet and not 810 square feet. And that's a really conscious decision that we make with an eye towards affordability and being able to serve as broad a world of homeowners as possible. Similarly, planning departments are only really allowed to put on development standards, very, very minimal development standards for these size of units. So they can't have really rigid architectural standards. They can't have all of the landscaping standards. They can't have all these other things. It's, are you less than 800 square feet? Are you less than 16 feet in height? So roughly 1 story. And do you fit within the rear and side setbacks of 4 feet? And as long as you follow those, they're not really standards that the planning departments can negotiate with you or put on you post hoc in the way that they can for larger units, even if they're all ministerial. And I think that that also is, like I said, a conscious decision that we made up front, that we can best serve homeowners with this promise of delighting them with the unit while simultaneously showing how easy construction can be with these things in mind up front. Here are just a few photos of the insides of our units, just so people can kind of get a feel for what we're working with here. This is a studio unit. As you can see, it's relatively modern. This is obviously furnished. We do have a full kitchen. We offer a washer dryer in these units. And that couch off to the side, there is actually a Murphy bed. And so you can have this be really a flex space, frankly, where we do see some of our customers that eventually want this to be a studio unit for an aging parent or a kid moving home or rental income. But for the time being, it's an extra work from home space. It's an exercise space. It's an extra just place for them to spend time with their kids or other guests. And so there is also some flexibility built in there. And that's something we have an eye to as well, knowing that this uptake of ADUs in particular in this bigger patchwork of missing middle housing, the transition to it being completely normalized is going to take a lot of this type of design flexibility and creativity as we go. This is the Abodu 1. This is a 1-bedroom. This is really just the view of how really spacious that living room area can be. We have these beautiful floor to ceiling La Cantina doors, lots of light, these vaulted ceilings that have an interesting slant to them. And again, just a really, really pleasant place to be. We actually have a showroom at our office in Redwood City, and really frequently my coworkers, when there's not a customer in there, are fighting over who can take meetings in the Abodu or who can just like take their own little break, because it's such a lovely place to spend time. And again, this is the Abodu 2. It's really the similar size as the Abodu 1-bedroom in terms of layout. There's just another bedroom on the other side of the living room. So a little bit symmetrical in its design in that sense. One thing that I want to also talk about here, going back to the permitting innovations that we've done. So not just design, not just supply chain and engineering, but also permitting. So you'll see here, this is kind of a timeline of how many months some ADU projects take. You'll see down here, the third row, some site-built ADUs can take 4 months for sales, design, engineering, and permitting. And then another 4 months, if you're lucky, for all of the site work and construction. And we know during COVID, obviously with material shortages and ups and downs in the labor market, sometimes that's even gotten pushed out even further. And some jurisdictions, permitting also gets pushed out even further. What's cool that Abodu can do is that because our units are pre-certified through the state's factory built housing program, though subject to the same rigorous code standards that traditional construction is from an energy point of view, structural, et cetera, most of our permit set has actually been pre-approved by the state of California before it's ever been associated with an address. And so that's a very different permitting process than a traditional project goes through, like the ones that we used to do at my old architecture firm, right? You have Joy and John at 123 Main Street. They have this custom design project, and then planning and building have never seen that design before, and they have to go through the full rigorous scrutiny queue of all of their traps. For prefab ADUs, for factory built ADUs, that's all been done by the state. That's been done once the factory has spit out that unit. And so we actually bypass a whole ton of that process because it's already been done. And the main focus of permitting is just the planning side of what's specific to that property, right? So what is specific about the soils on that property, what's specific about the size and the setbacks on that property. Sometimes we take an extra look at the trees or utility hookups, how far you are from a fire hydrant, but the structure itself has been pre-approved, and that's of extraordinary value when you have these long, many months building department queues. For an ABODU that is made to order for one of our customers, so they put custom, design specifications, they might get some cool option and upgrade, some unique kind of siding. That is manufactured, we send that order in the second the contract is signed, and that can take, 10 to 12 weeks to get through that full process, much faster than traditional construction, but still some time to it. Now, if you go to this top row here, quick ship, one thing that I think is really, really neat that has actually served a ton of customers during COVID is that we can sync up our permitting schedule and our manufacturing schedule by essentially being more similar to a car dealership and saying, we know what the most common models that people order are, the most common design, combinations of different upgrades. And we can actually have inventory units that we just have already made that are ready to be transported to that site the second the foundation is poured. And so we can get that permitting done very quickly. The unit is already constructed. And the second that that permit has been issued, a truck drives that unit to wherever the job site is. And it can be from 30 days from permit to install keys in hand with the homeowner. That's maybe 7 days of construction in the backyard, usually around foundation and utilities, but that's 1 month, right? And in some cities, we've already served dozens of homeowners with this program where it's actually much more important to them to get that use case done quickly and reliably than to have a super, super custom unit. And that's something really interesting that I've learned through doing this work is that what's driving a lot of these homeowners in motivating them to do the missing middle housing is not just, I want my custom architecture project that fits me exactly, but it might take 8 months. For some folks, they're doing an ADU because they're in that life position where they need it quickly. And we're also able to serve that use case better than most other folks. And we're equipped because of our product to do it in a way that traditional architects and traditional contractors are not able to, just because of the natural constraints there. In terms of our geographic spread, we're obviously growing quickly, but serving the entire Bay Area, including Napa and Sonoma. I know there are a lot of Petaluma folks here tonight. Los Angeles, Seattle, Monterey, Santa Cruz, Orange County, and San Diego. So you can kind of see California's statewide framework has made it really easy for us to expand within California where there is demand. Out of state is a little more complicated. And so I think that's one point of pride that those of us in California should have on the policy front, in that having a statewide ADU framework is really, really exceptional and nationally unique in the fact that we can have the security of knowing that any homeowner that wants to build an ADU in the state of California, as long as they meet really basic parameters of their property, has the right to do so and will not get tied up in a lot of legal and regulatory challenges like you might elsewhere. Just a little bit of kind of something interesting here. We do allow for people to do architectural and design customizations, even though we are factory built housing. These are all customizations that would not impact the ability to get permitted through that factory built program. And so I mostly show this, not necessarily to show them all off. We're not going to scroll through the whole book, but to show that there is a middle ground between something that's entirely prefab and something that's entirely custom and unique. We have a whole catalog of units that we've done that all have their own unique flavor for that homeowner, whether it's the kind of paint they use, the kind of roof style they have, the, do they have a bench? What kind of kitchen appliances do they have? What kind of doors do they have on the front? All of that lets a homeowner benefit from prefab and from the speed and reliability, but also lets them have their own taste and not have something that's entirely standardized and generic. I wanted to talk also about the installation that we do, because for prefab, this is particularly interesting. And I'm going to show you a video in a second that's pretty short, but kind of goes through what one of these installation days is. So at the time that we get our permit, we've already got our entire construction team rallied up and ready to go, because you usually have a bit of a sense in advance when you're going to get your permit. That construction team goes to the backyard, pours the foundation, and gets the utility hookups ready, usually in 7 to 10 days. And so that's the limit of the amount of construction time in your backyard during that time. we sync up that time period with the transport of the unit from either the factory or the lot where the inventory unit has been held, gets to the lot. An install day for one of these projects is less than a half day. And so you go from having this recently poured foundation and freshly ready utilities hookups there in the backyard, and starting at 8 a.m. and usually ending around 12 p.m., we have a unit that arrives. We have a crane that gets there. We briefly close off the street. Everyone comes out of their house with their kids to watch like it's a big block party. And we give everyone a hard hat. And you actually can see this crane deliver this 600 square foot ADU over all of the houses, sometimes over trees. We try to stay away from power lines. Usually that disqualifies a property, but and it gets delivered, and we have a whole team there, like ready to almost like catch it in a way and make sure it hits exactly how it needs to. And that whole process takes about maybe 5 minutes. And after that, there's, you go inside, you check the punch list, triple check there was no damage, and get everything started to be hooked up to get a certificate of occupancy within the week. And so I wanted to actually show here a video that we have of one of these installs. This one was in Redwood City, and just wanted to kind of, again, give you all a sense for what this day is like, because I think it's something really interesting in all of the creative ways that people are learning from lessons of all the different ways that we do construction and solving problems a little bit creatively in a way that looks very different than we've always done it. So I'm going to play this. I'm hoping the sound works. If it doesn't, if someone could just give me a thumbs down, I will try to troubleshoot.
The sound started and then cut out.
Oh.
It cut out again. I think that you need to turn on original sound in the... Oh, hang on one moment. Unshare and reshare. And when you reshare, click the share computer sound button on the share dialog.
Oh, terrific. Okay.
Can I fit share in that more times?
Yes, I think, hold on one second. Worked.
There we go.
All right. So I, again, kind of just wanted to show that to get a little bit of flavor, however brief, for sort of what that whole crane situation looks like. It is pretty neat. We have a whole video page of a bunch of these really fun things. We've had everything from elementary schools close by, like making it a field trip to just come out and watch, to people bringing out their grills and making a block party of it for the neighborhood. And yeah, it's just really neat to see how, logically you would think this makes sense. And then folks who have worked in construction before are like, this is crazy. This would never work. And then actually being out there and being able to see not just that it works, but also the other additional benefits that it brings. For example, in California, you're going to be able to build an ADU if you want to build an ADU, right? The city is obligated legally to give you that permit as long as it's compliant with objective standards. And so we're kind of in this neat situation where we can talk to neighbors and say, your alternative is having construction in someone's backyard for 6 months, right? And it might pause and it might start back up, and we don't know what the schedule will be and the permitting. And here it can be, a much easier sell both for that homeowner as well as their general neighborhood, and kind of really being able to deliver on this promise of having gentle, low impact density in housing that I think also just smooth this transition, because there is, for better or worse, just a lot of anxiety about what bringing development to neighborhoods means. And although I personally don't share that anxiety, I know that it exists, and I'm proud that we can really genuinely and with integrity say, we're addressing that in really meaningful ways in pursuit of this mission that we have to make it such that everyone who wants to have a backyard home is able to have one that fits them and their family and their needs. And so I guess just in conclusion, I'm going to tie up a little bit early because I know we've got some time for questions. But big high level of this, I think that it's neat and worth kind of expanding our imagination and our thinking a little bit on missing middle housing through the lessons that we've learned through ADUs, that you can set up policy, construction, and design such that permitting departments save a lot of time, save scarce public sector resources by making these reforms that don't sacrifice the quality of review or the quality of output. You can have homeowners save time, which for many people is saving money. And also just the sanity of knowing that something is going to get delivered on in a reliable and in a fast way, because most homeowners that are building ADUs, they're not professional developers, they're not professional architects, they're not professional landlords, they're just a person that wants to add space to their home for whatever reason. And so being able to save them time, save them money, and save them headaches is really, really important. And I think that we can learn a lot of lessons there in expanding our view of bringing all types of missing middle housing to our neighborhoods. And then in addition, builders also save time, right? If we're going to build a lot more housing in California of all types, we are very constrained by the capacities of the construction industry as it exists right now, in terms of the labor that's available, in terms of the contractors that are available, in terms of, in many cases, the materials that are available. And so being able to also approach these problems with, where do these solutions fit into the existing construction industry, or how will we bring the construction industry along with us as all of these changes are happening, such that we can really get from idea to real housing that real people are living in as quickly, as smoothly as possible. And so, yeah, all of that to the end of just more quality housing units in the ground much faster, to bring more affordability, more diversity, more access, and more financial empowerment to our neighborhoods. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I really, really love the opportunity to speak with Jane and hopefully give a concrete view of how a lot of these topics that we've been discussing apply in real life to folks that are, doing that work on the ground with real homeowners. We're just about to pass our 100th install, and we've permitted, I think, close to, 120, 130, 140 units, mostly in California. And so it's really neat to, again, see that uptake, see the speed, see the interest, and also see all of the lessons that we're able to learn and push forward and educate cities and homeowners on along the way. So thank you.
So thank you very much, Annie. I have a whole bunch of questions specifically for you, but then I also have a bunch of questions that came through, which I think both of you might have a shot at answering, because I know the experiences of both of you transcend the specifics of the presentations that you gave this evening. Starting out in chronological order, because I don't have the brain cells to actually do a lot of reshuffling and trying to order them. The first is from Ramon, asking if you have seen any agri-hoods built as missing middle, and I had to go look up the term, but I think the notion of building urban farms and community gardens as part of a denser development, so that people can get some of that outdoor experience and still have their dense walkable neighborhood.
Well, I don't know any particular examples, but I don't see why it wouldn't count as missing middle housing. So anywhere where you have multifamily or connected units where, if it's designed around agriculture, how amazing is that? So, I think they can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And so I think it's more like there's a lot more that can be part of this category. I wish I had a great example, but I don't.
Okay. As we're updating our general plan, and Petaluma is in the midst of that, what can we do to make sure our plan creates the best conditions for supporting missing middle housing and infill and greater density?
Yeah, this is a great question, and the cities of all of California are asking that right now. How do we streamline things as much as possible? There's a lot of different tactics that other cities have taken. One is just to make sure some of the laws that are inhibiting housing on lots are revised. That's a huge one. There's also revisiting what is allowable in the design guidelines and making sure they're objective, and that is something you have to do to meet state law, and that will make things a lot easier. I mean, what Annie brought up about saving time at the city is a huge thing. I think that this is a really important factor, because over time our laws have gotten more and more complicated, and they are quite anti-housing if you think about it. So we have to go back and look at what's realistic. And that's why I've done so many studies, just to say, if we have these fears about more density, they needed to be founded in some data, and just to get a sense of like, what is it that we're actually looking at? And hopefully the more people see the examples of real density, that they actually won't fear it. I'm hoping that, it does sound like growth is a bad word, but in this case, it's more sensitive and it can be really nice. So let's just keep that all in mind.
I'll also add too, I think on the housing element front, there's a lot of unknowns right now and exactly how HCD is going to be interpreting, development feasibility and exactly how they're going to be doing that analysis. So this will be a really, really interesting phase with some lessons we can learn from Southern California. I also just think that there is a toolbox really that we have that we know works and pushes us in the right direction, even if we can't exactly quantify it yet through the right methodology that might match what everyone else is doing. We know that reducing parking requirements both creates more space for more housing, it makes the land more affordable per unit, and it also makes the units more affordable because they're not bundled with that parking that may or may not be used. And we know that more and more in our communities are having people that are living car free, car light, using a bike or e-bike for most of their trips, riding transit, having car share. There's so many options. And so having housing that matches that and building that into our zoning and approach is going to be really, really valuable for this housing element cycle. I also think that form-based zoning, right? So doing some kind of density decontrol, even if you keep you can only have a building that is this size and shape and orientation on a lot. I love using the example in San Francisco where 72% of the land area of San Francisco, which is the most urban city in some people's minds in California, 72% of the city of San Francisco, it's illegal to build more densely than a duplex, but our maximum height in our zoning is 4 stories. And so you can think, why do we allow someone to build a 4-story single family home, but not a 4-story mid-rise 4, 6, 8 unit apartment building, right? What is the real rationale for that? And if we can't defend it, I think that that's something worthwhile to revisit that would get us to the place we need to be in our housing elements. Lastly, I'll also say that another component of the housing element is having this program section where you don't just say, this is how we're changing our zoning, but here are also all of the initiatives that we are pursuing to make sure that housing can not just get approved at the quantity on each lot, but also that it gets done fast and cheap and reliably. I've been working with a lot of cities on helping them reform how they approach ADUs. We know that in cities that have friendly ADU policies, we see a lot more homeowners pursue ADUs. That can be something like the city of San Jose has done, where we can get our permits for an ADU start to finish in 1 hour with the city of San Jose. They have ADU Tuesdays. Every single department relevant to an ADU permit signs on to the exact same 1-hour Zoom call that you have scheduled with them every Tuesday, and you're in and out with your permit in an hour. There's nothing unique about San Jose that makes them the only city that can do that. And I know that there are other folks looking at that type of thing, but there are a lot of tools that we know with certainty will work. And I think it requires us to both be brave about how we engage with our communities that are very anxious about that change, and also really creative in the planning solutions that we face, because we do collectively know how to solve that problem, have a complete and compliant housing element, and build enough housing.
Excellent. So that takes me right on to the next question on my list here. It's in Petaluma, we're concerned that homeowner trepidation fear of design, financing, construction, rental management, all of that stuff, may be the single greatest impediment to ADUs. Do other cities have solutions we can use? And clearly San Jose is one of them. Other cities we should be looking to for guidance and models?
On which part exactly?
Well, I guess on all of them. I'm not averse to plagiarism where we can make that work for us.
Yeah, so I think that, I mean, San Jose is really, in my experience, the gold standard in California on the permitting front. I think that there's so many lessons that we can learn there. There might be something that can't exactly be translated just based on the way the local agencies are structured, right? You have special districts, you have utilities, you have the city, you have the county. In some cases, it won't be as elegant as we see in San Jose, but I would say 60, 70, 80% of those lessons can be translated. Relevant to Napa and Sonoma, I know the Napa Sonoma ADU Center is a really fantastic partner that we've been working with for a long time that is in the process of launching kind of a similar cross-jurisdictional effort that I'm excited to see go on. I also think that one story that I like to use, and this is less about detached ADUs, but more the conversion style, is I would really like to see a new wave of policy where the privilege of building ADUs above and beyond what the state program allows is actually an incentive to coming in compliance with other values that the city has. A concrete look back at this is San Francisco, before the state ADU reforms happened, had this mayoral directive that we really needed to modernize the earthquake safety of all of our buildings, right? We have a lot of really old buildings. They will not be safe in an earthquake. Squarely speaking, a lot of people will die if there's a bad earthquake, and it could happen tomorrow. And so there was this rigid thing put forward, and property owners were terrified because they were house rich, cash poor, didn't know how they would finance these earthquake upgrades. The city of San Francisco adopted a local program as a footnote of that earthquake safety implementation project that said, in order to finance all of this structural earthquake retrofitting you need to do, you can, as a part of that same building permit, convert space into legal ADUs, as many as you can fit in that envelope, as a way to finance this other priority that the city has that's somewhat unrelated to density. And I think that obviously worked in San Francisco in that specific case. That was the era that I was an architect doing a ton of these projects in collaboration with those seismic retrofits. But think of all the other priorities our communities have. We have climate-friendly infrastructure. We want to get people on rooftop solar. We have all of these other things that, how about we talk about ADUs as a positive tool that you can use to get these other things we've all agreed that we want in our community, but often the ability to pay for it is the thing that's slowing us down. That's another thing I'll just plant in your head. I always take a moment to point out the utility of that program and how useful it was in getting ADUs in the ground. And also it turned ADUs among homeowners and property owners into this really exciting tool that can get you to where you want to go, as opposed to this thing that everyone's playing the nose game and has to stomach in their neighborhood because they don't want density.
Cool.
So there's my two ideas.
Excellent. And Jane, I noticed that you had a slide that mentioned, I think, Monterey. Are there cities in that area that we should be looking to for models?
Oh, absolutely. Well, Santa Cruz was one of the first. And so to have an ADU program, and it was before the state law as well. So I'm sure it's shifted and changed a little bit, but as each municipality is like trying out different policies and trying different things, I think this is a hot time to really share out all of those. We're learning amongst all the cities now. I mean, really, this is only a year or two where we're really getting going on a lot of these projects, and just to expand it beyond ADUs and thinking more multifamily as well. That's another thing as the next step. Of course, we're talking about missing middle housing here, so we're not talking about the higher density or mid density typologies, but really this is another really big way to go for affordable housing.
Cool. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I noticed that it is 8:03, but I hope that I've still got a whole bunch of questions, so I hope that I can prevail on people to stick around. I just wanted to offer the out if we're there. And the next question down, Annie already answered because the question was, do you work with an Napa Sonoma ADU? And indeed you do. There's a question about, there's a Petaluma situation where a property owner rented the primary home, then without keeping the renter involved or offering any concessions, built an ADU that took away the backyard and is only feet from the primary home. Do other cities have rules that would apply? Seems to me like this is something that should go to a real estate lawyer, but it was asked.
And that's rules that would apply to the setback between the buildings?
I think more to the notion of stomping on an existing lease or, constructing when there's an existing tenant.
That would be a good question for a real estate and tenant lawyer. Yeah, I mean, in my experience with a BODU, because we're doing detached ADUs that are brand new, where, that piece of grass, obviously, there's not a tenant on. And unless I would think, though I'm not a lawyer, unless there's a provision in the tenant of the primary residence lease that says part of your lease is this backyard that is dimensions X by X, I would think the homeowner would have or the property owner would have the right to build if it wasn't included in the lease. But if it was, I think they would have to adjust the price because they're no longer offering what the lease was originally signed at, is my best guess and my best understanding as someone who is very lawyer adjacent, but not a lawyer.
Yeah, I don't know. Mary asks, how can we find out what standards are waived for a small size ADU? She notes that she ran into anachronistic appliance requirements with Cal Green for a 500 square foot ADU. Great
question. So I would say the high level rule that you can think of is that most planning requirements are waived, except for the 4-foot setbacks and then the 800 square feet and 16 feet in height. However, building code is independent of ADU law. And so anything that has to do with fire safety, energy code, utilities, structural, all of that would be agnostic to the size of the ADU. Planning standards are architectural design. How does it look? Where do you put it on the lot? What materials can you use? All of that. A good example of this too is that even though our units are the small factory built units, we're still subject to the same standards in the building code as a 1,100 square foot site built ADU would be, right? It's inspected in a different way, but we're all held to the same building code standards, with the idea being health and safety standards don't change based on how big or small your ADU is, and energy code is consistent across all units.
Cool. One more general, and then I think we get into the specific of Annie's products. But the general question was Dave asking, I love the bungalow court concept. Do many cities have zoning codes that readily accommodate bungalow courts?
So I think there are many cities that have the zoning. The development standards are quite open, and so I think you can get bungalow courts within the setbacks and the current standards that are there. It's just, it doesn't specifically spell it out. So it's actually really exciting to see the different kinds of the designs that come through given our current laws. And actually, I'm hopeful that there would be a new type of court type housing that would be really exciting to see. And this is where we need firms or builders like BODU that come in with great new designs, and we hope to see them in more places.
Cool. And I said that about narrowing in on the BODU products, but then I see a couple of generic questions in the chat. So let's run through the BODU things quickly. We have one asking about the plumbing considerations and, of course, costs and footprints for the various BODU products.
Yeah, so I'm actually right now going to also just put our website in the chat. If folks want to noodle on it on their own time or take a look, we have a lot of photos and dimensions and the floor plans and all of the kind of technical pieces that you might need. In terms of plumbing, so obviously the individual unit itself, our superstructure, is built in a factory, inspected in a factory, and done there. So the plumbing fixtures That's just a part of that broad certification. We do it through Title 24, which is the Energy Building Code, which obviously governs not just energy, but also water efficiency and other resource efficiency components. We hook up plumbing when we do that post-install with the utilities. There are different considerations depending on which jurisdiction you're in about if your water utility is a special district or is it municipal through your city. And depending on how old and also how your existing plumbing infrastructure is set up to connect to the sewer, there are different ways that in order to be compliant with the code and with that agency standards, you need to hook up to the broader water system, right? So sometimes you need a separate water meter, though that's quite rare. It's usually only on super sloped or strange lots. And often you can key off your plumbing from the primary residence. There's nothing legally requiring you to get a separate water meter unless there's absolutely, from an engineering point of view, no other way to hook up to the sewer system. Sometimes there are some fees associated with that, but it's quite rare. And the plumbing itself in the unit, the individual fixtures are customizable from a design point of view, but the way that the building code approves them is essentially by the number of low flow fixtures that you have. And so we just make sure that those are consistent, across whatever customizations might be done for a unit. And that obviously is, kitchen sink, bathroom sink, toilet, shower, all of the kind of normal plumbing things that you would think of.
Cool. To the earlier comment about creating incentives for homeowners, there's a question here about a housing element to create incentives for land trusts or other deed agreements to preserve affordability. I know that we've got, and I always get the order of these things wrong, the Sonoma County Housing Land Trust. I hope I got those words in the correct order. Dev will smack me if I didn't. So are there do either of you have any experience with creating incentives for local affordable housing trusts to hold portions of the ADU in trust for lower income residents?
I mean, legally, there is a structure. I've not seen it used in practice much, but you could easily translate the structure that we use for like 100-year ground leases for affordable housing on public property to this model. So right now, if you have a piece of public property that the city doesn't necessarily want to sell off or surplus, but they would like to see it have developed onto affordable housing, there's a pretty straightforward contractual agreement you can set up with a nonprofit affordable housing organization that says, we are giving you a 100-year lease of the dirt under which the affordable housing development will be above, with the idea that it's probably not going to exist for more than 100 years, but they will need 100 years to get that full life cycle of the building out of. And essentially, as long as you don't violate the terms of that contract in terms of what you do to the dirt underneath while it is being used and operated, that structure is fully within the ownership and operation, for lack of a better term, of that affordable housing organization. I have not yet seen this be used in my experience for backyard ADUs. I'm sure Jane might be able to speak to other kinds of missing middle housing, but there's nothing legally that would stop them from doing it. I just don't know how easy it would be to scale to have like one individual contract for every single one unit that you would need. I will say another thing that I find really compelling that I've been digging into a lot on this affordability part, particularly for affordable homeownership, is figuring out what kind of reforms would be needed in order for someone to be able to get a mortgage on a home with an ADU, or that they are intending to build an ADU on, by being able to take into account that future rental income of the ADU as income when you're applying for the loan. So for example, if you are only making, say, $80,000 a year, but you want to buy a home that could have an ADU that you could rent out for $2,000 a month, that's $24,000 more dollars a year that you could theoretically, that you will be taking as income. But right now the banking system is not set up to be able to assume that unless it's currently existing and occupied when you sign that loan. And so there are a lot of people thinking about this and looking at creative ways that can be used to lower the barrier to homeownership, particularly on that, like being able to qualify for the mortgage front without it getting to the point that those loans are predatory, right? Because that's the other concern on the other side, that if we're too loose with what we assume as future income, folks can find themselves in a tough position when it didn't pan out because there was not enough diligence done in that process. But I think on the affordable homeownership front, that's really great. I think that the thing that I had mentioned before about land trusts, like maybe it would work. I'm not exactly sure. I've also seen in a handful of different cities, really interesting partnerships between like the planning and building departments and the local housing authority, where they'll essentially say that if you build an ADU and you don't necessarily want to do all of the like management and operations of finding a tenant, you can actually essentially outsource that to the city, and they'll say, we will guarantee you X income per year as long as we can make sure that these specific groups, you know, consistent with fair housing principles, low income seniors, Section 8 holders, all of that, that we can essentially, you know, your unit can be a part of that system that we have. We'll find the tenant, we'll vet the tenant, we'll collect the rent, we'll handle a lot of that property management stuff. And in exchange, you will be absolutely guaranteed X amount of income. Those partnerships I think are really interesting, though they're quite new. So they're probably getting polished and perfected, you know, every month that we're getting new information about it. But I find it really compelling, and I hope that they're successful.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of innovations right now that are happening to try to, you know, use land trusts or all these other different kinds of partnerships. And so we will see a lot of changes over time in the next decade or more, I mean, for sure. So, but what I think missing middle housing is like what someone who's not necessarily a developer might do with their own home, which I think is pretty exciting if you're just sort of like, well, if you want to do a little bit with your house and take part in all of this building of a new, of more housing, this is what you can do on your own lot. So it's it gives a lot of people agency. And of course, there's a lot of things to learn along the way, and it can be done with more efficiency with bigger companies who really focus on it. But you know, you get to really do your thing if you want to try it.
Next one is, and this is kind of pertinent to me as the owner and builder of a structure which has a living roof, which I now regret building as a living roof because of water usage concerns. What are the constraints for using roofs as square footage and open space for more dense environments?
The constraints you said?
Yeah, I think the notion behind the question is, if we're building density, can we use roof space as additional living space, as yard, as kind of additional structural space?
Well, I think that's pretty nice, actually. I mean, we're starting to see it a little bit more, but yeah, if you get a view from your rooftop garden, it's kind of nice to have a different perspective than at the ground. It has other issues, of course, with, you know, how it's constructed, but it's kind of a nice amenity, so why not?
Yeah, I agree with Jane. I mean, in terms of like practical constraints, you know, depending on the occupancy load of the roof, you might have to beef up the structural a bit, which is doable, right? That's a solvable engineering problem. And further, like, you know, make sure you have rails of the right height, and there's nothing that should be stopping you from being able to do that besides whatever obstruction you need for that stair, you know, penthouse to get up there. I know in San Francisco, sometimes there are these crazy appeal fights because someone doesn't want to look at the stair thing. But I think, you know, given all the benefits, we can get over that, or I would hope. But yeah, I think that, you know, we should be creative about how we approach open space, and also what the value of open space is for that reason, right? Sometimes we talk about open space because of the importance of an urban tree canopy and all of the benefits that we get for, you know, retaining heat and for the ecosystem and for the local ecology. A roof deck doesn't necessarily solve that problem. But if we're talking about open space as safe, private or semi-private space for people to be able to enjoy in lieu of a yard, go for it. I think that that's terrific.
And if I could add one more thing, there's like this kind of greater thinking about open spaces. And if you are able to densify in town, it really means you can save the places that are really nice and open right at the edges of town. So do more in the city, and you can on built space, developed space already. And I think it'll be it's what it's for. That's the best place for it.
Yeah, I think of the last apartment I lived in San Francisco before I moved in here. And, every property in San Francisco is within a 10-minute walk of a public park, which I think is really terrific. I had several within, a few blocks walking of my very central, dense, urban, renter-heavy neighborhood. And also in the top of our 20-unit building, there was a roof that I don't know whether it was intended to be a roof deck or not, but the tenants liked the communal feel of being on their roof, being able to be outside, having that semi-private space. We didn't have a courtyard, and you go up there at any point in time. I don't know if we were allowed to or not, but there were tons of, these ad hoc kind of tactical urbanism spaces where people would have their 5 friends over for a glass of wine, bring some music out. Someone would be laying out trying to get a suntan. And it was really lovely. And it served that purpose of open space that engendered community, people enjoying the outdoors, and also people not just being limited by the confines of their 500 square foot overpriced apartment, which I think is something that really sweetens the deal of some of the side effects of what comes with, having a lot of density that can sometimes push, unit sizes to smaller than they would be in the suburbs.
Cool. And I think we'll end on a multi-part question about economics. In California, we have a lot of, nationally, the United States has a lot of incentive toward building intergenerational wealth with home ownership. And in California, particularly with things like Prop 13, this has turned into perverse incentives where every homeowner has a huge incentive to keep housing supply very low. On the other hand, the model for adding ADUs to backyards, increasing housing stock, also means that the renters are kept out of that homeownership wealth train that we're riding. Either of you have ideas on how we might address that or what that means? I mean, this is kind of a bummer to end it on, but.
Jane, do you want to go first?
This one's a tough one. Well, there was recently a state bill SB 9, and it allows for lot split of single family homes. And so I think, as when you split a lot, then it's, half as big and maybe less cost, and that might help someone who's looking for something on the lower end of the market or like a smaller lot to afford that. But this is a really tough problem there, and it's pretty exacerbated in the Bay Area. I think that in order to do this, we do really need to increase the supply of housing to really make it possible for people to find different options. And that's why, beyond missing middle housing, if you can own a condo, that might be your first stepping stone more than owning your own single family home. And while that may not sit that well with a lot of folks who already own single family homes because you were super lucky, and you might have bought it like 20 years ago when it was awesomely priced, that's basically what the latest generation of new homeowners are looking at. And so unless there's more options out there, it's going to be tough like this.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I'll add is that I think that, these are intertwined, right? Because people who are locked out of homeownership are renters otherwise, if not living for free with their family or with other loved ones or on the streets. And by also promoting housing policy that brings rental prices down, that increases an individual's capacity to save for homeownership, right? And so I think that it's important to not think of them as you're either one type or you're the other type, but it's rather you are already a homeowner, or in most cases, you're a renter who would like to someday be a homeowner, and making that path to becoming one more accessible. I think a big part of that is making sure that someone is not paying 60% of their income on their rent, right? If we can bring that number down and they could rather be saving that and investing that and building towards a down payment, that's a huge step. I don't believe that not building rental housing is the best way to make people not renters. I think that we will just become very overcrowded and having 3-hour super commutes if we don't build rental housing. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of answers. And I think that ADUs in particular can also make it such that becoming a homeowner, there is a lower barrier to entry, right? Because you can say, I might be right now paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month to have my parents in an assisted living facility. But if I can have an ADU in my backyard, that's money that I, can be investing towards my down payment or towards my mortgage, because there's this housing solution that fits into the broader system of how I handle my finances. And that's the way that a lot of people make these decisions. The money is very fungible. And I think that there's that big, huge initial hurdle to getting into homeownership. And then there's that plateau of just making sure that you can keep it working. I speak here as a renter. I am on no path to becoming a homeowner anytime soon as a, educated professional, almost 30-year-old. And I certainly know that elsewhere in the country I might be. And also, if I lived in a city that had much lower rents, I might be on a closer path. And the second of those is solvable through policy, I think, over time.
Cool. I think there was one additional comment, a couple actually, some of them came straight to me about parking, and I think we need to have Patrick Siegman back to talk about the economics of parking, or maybe even get Don Shoup to talk to us, but we'll address that later. Thank you very, very much. This has been a fantastic session. We got up to 33, which, as Dave noted in the pre-show, on a Warriors night is pretty impressive. And thank you, Jane Lynn, and thank you, Annie Fryman, for your participation. Because it has been asked a couple of times, we will get the recording up. It takes me a little while to download it, process it, put it back up on YouTube. It will show up on urbanchat.org sometime in the next few days. If you really can't wait and don't mind all the square dancing comments, you can also find it on youtube.com/danlike as soon as it finishes happening there, because that's my own personal channel where I upload all these things for. Once again, thank you very, very much. And with that, I will hopefully see you all on, let me scroll up here in my notes so that I can find it. May 11th, when we talk with Smart General Manager Eddie Cummins. And if anybody's around tomorrow at noon at Aquas, we would love more hands on deck to help us plan future sessions. Thank you very much and good evening.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.